Ready? Bismillahir Rahmanir Rahim. Alhamdulillahi Rabbil Alameen. Wa usalli wa usallim ala Sayyid al-awwaleen wal-akhirin Nabiyyina Muhammadin wa ala alihi wa sahbihi wa barik wa sallam. All praise is due to Allah, Lord of the worlds, and peace and blessings be constantly showered upon our beloved Prophet Muhammad, the master of the first and the last, and upon his family and his followers and all those who establish his sunnah to the day of judgment. Assalamu alaikum wa rahmatullahi wa barakatuh. Alhamdulillah, this is another opportunity for us to reflect upon the mercy of Allah subhanahu wa ta'ala. The mercy that Allah had on this ummah, on this nation, in that it would not be a nation that would become extinct. It would not be a nation where people would look at, for instance, the ancient Greeks and the Romans and the ancient Syriac people, the Phoenicians, and look at their monuments and say they were a great people at one time. But the difference is that Allah would give us a blessing that we could revive ourselves, that we could first go to a high level, and if we lost our way, then Allah subhanahu wa ta'ala would give us tajdeed, would give us revival, renewal, a way to come back to the original principles. And that is one of the great blessings of this ummah, which has enabled it to stand the test of time and the test of distance and language and hostility. And in the revival itself, we learned that the revivalists can be an individual or a group. The revivalists are not necessarily military leaders. The revivalists are people who put new life into Islamic thinking. They confront real issues and they bring beneficial solutions to real issues so that people can live with their Islam during the time period that they are living in. And when we look at the revivalists, there are a number of names that stand out. Area called Bilad al-Hausa, Hausa land, which is now northern Nigeria and parts of Ghana and Niger, and it's a huge area. And the Hausa-speaking people are one of the largest linguistic groups in West Africa. And Nigeria, as you know, is one of the most powerful nations on the African continent. And in terms of numbers, after Egypt, Nigeria is really the second in numbers. In terms of Muslims, the second largest population of Muslims is in Nigeria. Third is in Ethiopia. The first is in Egypt. So it's a very significant place. And in terms of development up until now, below the Sahara region, it is one of the most developed countries, along with South Africa, of course. But Nigeria is right up there in many different ways. And so in this complex land, with a very important population of people, Allah subhanahu wa ta'ala willed that Islam would come in early times, that way back in the 11th, 12th, 13th century, that Islam would come over. And it came across West Africa from the side of Senegal, that's on the Atlantic coast, from the area of Senegal. Senegal and these regions there, they received the baton, or they received the Islam from North Africans. North Africans got it from the Arabs and the early Sahaba and Tabi'een who came across North Africa. So in the same way that Islamic teaching spread, you find many of the cultural traditions are the same. In terms of their approach to fiqh and understanding Islam, they are Maliki. In fiqh, they follow Imam Malik ibn Anas, rahimahullah, the great master of the Muwatta. And they are part of the chain of transmission coming from the scholars in Andalusia, North Africa, Egypt, going back to Medina. So this is how their transmission went, right across. And Shaykh Uthman rahimahullah, by the age of 20 years old, and he was born in a religious family. They were what is called Fulani people, the Fulah, and they are nomadic people. So they move with their cows and cattle, and they go right across huge swaths of territory. And along with the herds and along with the nomads, there would be ulama, there would be scholars. So there would literally be scholarly clans amongst the Fulani. So the Fulani knew which ones dedicate their life, and they would work together because they would deal with religious sciences, they would deal with marriage, birth, death, all the things involved with the Islamic way of life. And the merchants who are moving with the cattle, they deal with the economic things. So they work as a team, and they're able to sustain each other and go across. And when they come into an area and they meet agricultural people, they provide manure, fertilizer. They also provide milk. They provide meat. They provide hide. And the agricultural people provide the vegetables and the different products that the nomads need. So it's a symbiosis where they work together. And this is how life has been in the Savannah region, right across West Africa. In many parts of the world, you will also see life like this. So Shaykh Uthman called Shehu, they call him Shehu within their language. The Shehu rahimahullah was born in a religious family. His father was a scholar, so his name Ibn Fudi or Dan Fodio. It means Ibn Mu'allim, the son of a teacher, an alim. That's what that name means. And his mother was also a scholar. His uncles were scholars. So right around him were masters in the Quran and tafsir explanation. There were masters in hadith. There were masters in aqidah, masters in Arabic language. So as a young person, he could literally go from tent to tent and gain valuable information. And then he also met with scholars who were coming from Timbuktu, remember the great center of West African learning, and who also are connected to North Africa. So there was a lot of scholarly movement in that area at the time. So by 1774, and this is the first phase of his life, and what is important about Shaykh Uthman is that he not only revived Islam in thought, but he actually implemented Islam. Now this is something that's rare amongst people who we consider to be the Mujaddid. Usually the Mujaddid is the one with the thoughts, and the Sultan or somebody else puts it into practice. Okay, but in his case, he actually implemented it, and by the will of Allah, not by his desire, he actually became the leader. So from 1774 to 1804, this is a 30-year period. This is the period that is called the time of travel, study, and preaching. So he spent 30 years in the field, traveling these huge areas, teaching, preaching, interacting with people, understanding their culture, correcting their mistakes, uniting people of different tribes. 30 years in the field. In 1804, and that's the period of 1804 to 1810, in that period of his life is the period of jihad, revival, and justice. So in that period, his community, which had grown in numbers, and by 1804, as we had mentioned, when he traveled from one place to another place, 1,000 students traveled with him. You remember how famous Imam al-Ghazali was, right? But he had an institution, Nizamiya. He had the biggest Islamic institution in the Muslim world. It's like Harvard University or, McGill or something like this. Sheikh Uthman's university is in the middle of the desert. Okay? But 1,000 students would travel with him. That's how famous he was. And they would survive in the best way they could. And wherever he stopped under a tree, that's the university. And they form halaqas, circles of knowledge. They interact with the local villages. They're like a moving city of knowledge. And this got the Hausa kings jealous. They became angry of him because he was becoming too famous. And they tried to assassinate him, but Allah subhanahu wa ta'ala miraculously saved him. And he retreated to a village. And it is there that he had a dream, and he saw Rasulullah sallallahu alaihi wasallam came to him in his dream and brought him the sword of truth. This was a turning point in his life, because he was basically just a scholar. Okay, but now the Prophet sallallahu alaihi wasallam in a green turban with sahabas with him, all dressed for war, gave him the sword of truth and said, go forward and establish justice. So he announced this to the people, and he took bay'ah. He took a pledge, an oath. And this is a similar oath as what the Prophet ﷺ took. You remember, they had made hijrah to Medina. Okay, so they're under persecution. They make hijrah to Medina, and then the Quraysh comes in large numbers, right after Abu Sufyan escaped with the caravan. And then the Prophet, peace be upon him, took a pledge with the Sahaba. Are you with me? And they said, we will follow you to the ends of the earth. We're with you. That's a very serious pledge. That's why the people of Badr, if you look at somebody's biography, if they are a person who was in the Battle of Badr, that's a special quality. Similarly, when the Shah was under attack, before that he took the bay'ah, they were outnumbered, and they defeated their enemies. And he gave the leaders flags. He gave them flags. And he said, take this back to your people and establish justice in your area. And so they established justice, and they moved out, and they took over the territories from the evil kings of the Hausa. And within a short period of time, they were controlling 250,000 miles of territory. That's a lot of land. 250,000, like square kilometers. It's a huge piece of land. And so that's the period from 1804 to 1810. And one of the first things they did was establish justice. So they established courts, and the people of the courts and the leaders in the different areas would write to each other in classical Arabic. Now this is one of the amazing things about this, not so well known. They documented letters. You can go to archives right now in Nigeria, and you can read letters from different Aamirs of different sections writing to the central government. So they had a government established, and they announced a type of khilafat, but it was not Aamir al-Mu'mineen of the Muslim world, no. But they announced Islamic rule. And that was the period from 1810 to 1817. So in that period of time, this is where the society, the Khilafat was established. And after it was grounded, then the Sheikh Rahimahullah, he gave the power to the community, and he said, you choose somebody as a successor who's worthy of it. I will not tell you who it is. And he retreated. He went to his village, and he taught his Islamic studies, reviving Islam, until he died. So this is a great mujaddid, because not only did he establish the word, but he established the practice. He implemented the word. So this is why he's special person. And many of the things that he said were not necessarily new, because we base ourselves on Quran and on Sunnah and on great scholars, but it is how he said it and when he said it, how it met the needs of the people who he was dealing with. And we saw in last week's class how he was dealing with even the hygiene of the people. He was dealing with their marital affairs. He was dealing with business. He was dealing with, important areas in their life, practical areas. This is one of the great things about this scholar who has over 150 books that are written. Each of his books is like a manual. It's like something that you can literally implement. Very practical writer. Okay, right to the point. Hitting, concepts right on the head. And so, from amongst his teachings, and this discussion could go on for hours, there are certain key points I want to get across to you to open up the door again to his teachings. What was his guidance to the scholars? Now, as a young scholar coming into the field, he's 20 years old now, 20. And he's on a high level of Islamic learning. But there are elderly people there. I mean, we know that prophethood and real wisdom is like 40 years old, right? He's a 20-year-old man. And he comes on very strong, very clear, and there was opposition. And he identified, the opposition very clearly, and he held his ground. And he gave serious advice to the scholars. From amongst this advice, he redefined the concept of an authentic scholar. What is a scholar? Is a scholar somebody who wears certain clothes? Just like they say today, is it the thobe that you have on? Because the Pope has got nice thobes. You ever see the Pope's thobes? They're really nice. So if it's about clothes, he's on top. Is it a beard, a nice beard? Fidel Castro had a beautiful beard all of his life. So it's not about a beard. And he was a communist. So it's not just your outward appearance. What is it that defines a scholar? And so he hit on certain points which were critical for his society. But the shocking thing about it for me is that I found that these points actually apply to us today. What did he say? He said that one of the big issues for the scholars is they have to be aware of the danger of wealth and position. Now, this is a very important point. The danger of wealth and the position. And this is what happened. We see it happening all around us. A person becomes a great scholar, and then they bump him up, as we would say. They put him in a high position as a mufti or whatever, and put him behind, closed doors so he can't touch the people. He was down on the ground with the people. Right, so they give him a position. Make him part of a presidential committee. Give him an honorary award. Give him a Pulitzer Prize. Give him a Nobel Peace Prize. Whatever, the high position, right? And wealth. So for most people, if you start giving them a lot of wealth, then it's difficult for them to maintain. Very difficult. And we know that the Prophet ﷺ had said, and this is in our 40 hadith, right? Inna likulli umma fitna, wa fitnatu ummati al-mal. Every nation has a trial and test, and the trial and test of this nation, my nation, is wealth. He hit it right on the head. Look at our scholars today. And look at these points that he's making. Number 2. And this is a very interesting point that I found amongst the many points that he had. He said one of the challenges facing the scholars, thing they have to watch out for is obstinacy and unnecessary disagreements, as in the blind following of madahib, schools of thought. So what he's saying is, and he's talking to scholars, obstinate person is a stubborn, ignorant person that will not change their position. My way or the highway. my school of thought or no other school of thought. And you can see this happening in many masjids and community. You come in with a different approach to Islam, even though it's documented and everything. And they make you feel unwelcome in the masjid. They might even talk against you, right? Because you have a different school of thought. And this is a scholar now who's saying, do not become stubborn and ignorant. You have to be flexible person, right? This is the real authentic scholar now. The person can literally, how are we going to pray? So we went to the hadith of the Prophet ﷺ who said, Sallu kama ra'aytumuni usalli. Pray as you have seen me pray. That's what he said. He didn't say follow one particular scholar. He said, pray as you have seen me pray. So therefore, if there was somebody in Maliki or Hanbali or Shafi'i who's different than Hanafi, but it's based on what the Prophet ﷺ did, then this should be acceptable. And this was strange for some people, because when we Shafi'is came and Hanbalis, and then wala Darleen, they said, Aamir. Many of the Hanafis said, Astaghfirullah. What's this noise? They never heard something like this. Okay, then we showed them nicely that it is sunnah. So you have an option. You have an option to be silent or an option to say it out loud. So if you, technically speaking now, think about this. And I say this with all respects to the school of thought, because ultimately I believe that people will be following some organized school of thought, unless you are a mujtahid scholar. But with all respects, if there is a practice, if the person is Hanafi, since we made this point, and they said Aamir out loud, are they wrong? Will they be punished by Allah subhanahu wa ta'ala? Think about this. But there are some scholars that tell you you're wrong. You're a Hanafi. You can't do that. Now, that person has put his face in front of the face of the Prophet sallallahu alaihi wasallam. The Prophet did it that way and allowed it that way. And this person has now come and prohibited the sunnah. You see? So it's a very serious issue. And you'll see that the great scholars, especially Imam Abu Hanifa, rahimahullah, who was probably one of the most flexible of all the scholars. If you look at his school of thought, they were the ones that had opinion of this, because they didn't have hadith books. There was no Bukhari, there was no Muslim, there was Muwatta, there was not. They had to use their opinion in a lot of things. So they're Hanafis, very flexible. But you don't get that from some people. Similarly, this is what he found. So he said, now, open up your minds. Next, he said, the authentic scholar does self-criticism. What we don't have today, we don't criticize ourselves. Very important point. That a scholar has to constantly be criticizing themselves, even if a young boy or a woman or whatever, whoever, tells them something, corrects them, and they are right. You're supposed to say, you are correct. That is the way of the companions. Right? Because there's no arrogance in the religion of Allah subhanahu wa ta'ala. So he pointed this out. He also said, and this is a very deep point, and it would take a long time, but I want to just give you a taste of the level of this scholar's thinking. And this has helped me to understand some of the things that are going on in the world, especially among scholars. And this is, you need to correct misconceptions. In other words, people do certain things, but they're actually doing something else. But you think that or they might even think, they might be deluded themselves into thinking it was. I'll give you an example of what he said. He challenged the ulama, and he said, confront your weaknesses. Deal with your weakness. If you're weak in certain areas, admit that you're weak. Stop making excuses. And he said, these are some of the points. This is a whole text that he actually did. But he said, among their misconceptions is that some of them have attributed the inability to accomplish to the love of calling to Allah. So in other words, he can't do something. He's unable to do it. So he says, that's because Allah blessed me not to do it. This is a deluded person, right? Okay, this is a deep concept. And among their misconceptions is that some of them have attributed the love of leadership to the love of calling to Allah. What they really want is power, right? But they try to mask it in the love for Allah subhanahu wa ta'ala. But they're really looking for power. And among their misconceptions is that some of them have attributed exaggeration to ijtihad. Remember, ijtihad is a religious decision made on a new issue, right? Using certain principles. It's ijtihad. So they exaggerate and they say it's a ijtihad. Okay? In their exaggeration. And among their misconceptions is that some of them have attributed humiliation to forgiveness. They are being humiliated by somebody. And they say, no, it's just because we forgive them. We like turn the other cheek, right? But they're being humiliated. Okay? And they have a misconception. They got to deal with their weakness. It's not that everybody can be strong. As the Prophet ﷺ said, the strong Muslim is better than the weak Muslim. But there's good in both of them. But stop making excuses for yourself. He said, and among their misconceptions is that some of them have attributed wastefulness to generosity. This is deep. Right? They're wasteful, but they say, no, I'm generous. Okay? Especially giving money to their friends and, building all this stuff, things in the masjid. They said that they're just really being wasteful. And among their misconceptions is that some of them have attributed arrogance to dignity. See, they're arrogant, but they say, no, I'm a dignified person. But he's really an arrogant person. Okay? That's a misconception. And among their misconceptions is that some of them have attributed fear to gentleness. This is deep. The person's a coward, right? He said, no, I'm just a gentle person. But they're really a coward. And among their misconceptions is that some of them have attributed bribery to gift giving. That one's easy to see, right? They bribing people, and they said, no, it's a gift giving. Like I was going into, I'll say the country. We were in Nairobi, and in Nairobi, the long line to get in, and me and the sheikh from Pakistan, we were there, and we're in this long line, and we're trying to do this program, right? Suddenly, somebody comes walking in the front of all the way, all these poor people in the long line. Third world lines in airports, right? They come walking to the end and say, you two, can you please come with us? I said, okay. So we walked. I felt embarrassed, right? People look and say, who is this? What is this? So we go in the office, and then the officer, he says, let me have your passport. So we give him the passport, boom, boom, boom. Okay, you're free to go. So we went in, and the brothers are there. And I said, what is this, brother? What happened? He said, no, this is Kenya, man, this is Nairobi. I gave him a newspaper, and I said, did you see the latest cricket scores? It's on page 25. You'll be surprised. He turned to page 25, right? And there's, a whole set of notes there. Money is there, right? And when he sees that, he said, yes, really good game. Bring those too. You see what he did? But no, the brother said, no, I just given a gift. See what the sheikh said? That's not gift giving. You bribed him to do this, right? So on a scholarly level, you have to be able to deal with your misconceptions. This is the kind of thinking that this man has, right? This is the level that he was actually on. And again, you think of Islam in Africa, right? You don't think of something as deep as this, right? But this is the level that he reached. Then he also said, rahimahullah, he said, concerning the sins of the heart, And I don't have the time to go into the details of all of this, right? Maybe at another point, if we have a retreat, we can really go into details. But he said, the sins of the heart. And the heart is a key issue that we learned, very important. If the Prophet said, if the heart goes right, everything is right. If it's corrupted, everything is corrupted. He said, amongst these are feelings of security and despair. So if you feel secure, if you think you're going to paradise, and you feel secure, then that's a disease in your heart, man, because nobody's secure. And it is said that Imam Ahmed ibn Hanbal, rahimahullah, when he was on his deathbed, this is Imam Ahmed, one of the greatest of the Imams in Islamic history. And he said, La ba'd, la ba'd. Not yet, not yet. And the students said, Sheikh, why are you saying this? And he's saying, because Shaitan just came to me and said, you made it, Ahmed. You're going to paradise. And he said, not yet. Right? Think about this. He said, not yet. Right? Until he passed. As a scholar, the things that he did for Islam should be able to forgive 1,000 people. He said, not yet. So nobody should feel secure. Similarly, nobody should go into despair, where you lose all hope with Allah subhanahu wa ta'ala. Then he said also belittling of sin. If you make fun of sin, you make a joke out of people doing wrong. That's a disease of the heart. He said delaying repentance. If you do something wrong, you should make tawbah right away and not delay. He said persistence in disobedience. To persist in disobedience. It's one thing if you do something wrong. Okay, the person, makes a mistake and they didn't make salat or they mess up. But if you persist in it, now your heart is sick. See how he's thinking now? He said dissimulation is like riyah, showing off, to be seen by other people in your religious affairs. Ostentation and pride. Right? That is, too much fat, ostentation, showing off clothing, pride, all that is a disease. The love of adornment of this world. Okay? Vying in wealth and position. He said disdain at appearing humble. So if you appear humble at some point, you trip and you fall down, right? Or you don't have your best clothes on, right? No. You can be humble. Because the Prophet ﷺ himself was humble, physical person. Despising the masses. If you hate the masses of the people, and you see in some scholars, they're talking and they just talk down on people. Oh, you Muslims can't do this and you can't do that and you're worth nothing. And you look down on the masses of the people. That's a sickness and a sin of the heart. He also said glorifying and beseeching the rich, while pushing away and disdainfully treating the poor. Right? You're glorifying the kings, glorifying the powerful. And then he said, of course, envy, hatred, suspicion of people, eavesdropping, right? Where you sneaking and listening, and treachery. Okay? Now these are the qualities. This is how he taught his students. This is how he trained his people. So what he did was, he trained his people, he purified his people in order to do something. So it wasn't just purifying to purify, but it was to implement Islam. Now, going to the area of ihsan, right, or tasawwuf, Sufism, right, he is a very important person. Extremely important person. And this is a long discussion here, but just so you basically know, Tasawwuf was introduced by a group called the Kunta. And the Kunta are actually Arabic-speaking people from the Arabian Peninsula, from the family of Hassan, the Ahlul Bayt, who settled in the desert region. Right? Many of the Kunta are now in Mauritania and places like that. Right? It's a special group known. Sidi Ahmed al-Bakkai al-Qadri. Okay? And so these are a number of different points. But by the 18th century, Sidi Mukhtar al-Kunti, the leader of West Africa, he had his own formula for dhikr called wird. It's a formula for making dhikr. Okay? And he didn't bind himself to one group, and he saw zuhud, abstinence, as detachment of the heart from the need of the world and not the world. So in other words, you can be in the world, you can have things, but if you're attached to it, now you got a problem. Zuhud, abstinence, is when you don't need material things. Okay? And he encouraged business. So this is someone who's a Sufi, but he's encouraging business, right? And so by the 17th century, Tasawwuf entered Hausaland. Okay? And Sheikh Jibril, who was the teacher of Sheikh Uthman, he was initiated into the Qadiriyah. This is the Sufi tariqah of Abdul Qadir Jailani, right? It is the major Tasawwuf group. It's called Qadiriyah, right? So Sheikh Jibril was initiated into the Qadiriyah by Sheikh Murtada al-Zabidi. That's from Yemen. Remember, he was one of the scholars in Yemen who was in Medina. It was in Cairo that Sheikh Jibril was initiated into this. And he initiated Sheikh Uthman into the Qadiriyah and the Khalwatiyah. That's another group. So he was initiated into these two groups. Okay? What was his approach to Tasawwuf? It's called sober, cautious approach. So sober means that you're dealing more with ihsan, righteousness, but you're not into wild things. Okay, like some people, they do, the whirling dervishes, and they do the hadara, right? They do, things, they go into heavy, but a sober approach is where the person is introspecting into their heart and into their character. It's Bab al-Ihsan. It's Ihsan, Islam, Iman, Ihsan, right? So that was his approach. And he said that the wilaya, which means the leadership, the one who's wali, who is your wali? Who is your master? He said it was based on adherence to the Quran and the Sunnah and leaving desires and bid'ah. Respecting sheikhs, knowledgeable people, considering the rest of creation non-existent. In other words, you don't need anybody. And persistence in awrad, persistence in the dhikr that you say. Wird, the plural is awrad. They have formulas for making dhikr. Right? So persistence in it. And wara. Now remember this quality of wara. Wara is the quality higher than taqwa, in a sense. And they say that Abu Bakr as-Siddiq, radiallahu anh, was one of the greatest people of wara. And Ali ibn Abi Talib said, the cure for this nation will be wara. What is wara? You leave something halal in order to stay out of haram. And the example I think we had used is that the person who was going to stand up to make 2 rakats and the people gathered around, and he knew that he might fall into riyah. So instead of making those 2 rakats, he just left. He didn't make it. He had the right to make the 2 rakats, but he felt in himself that if he did it, the people watching him is going to influence him, and he's going to have riyah, right? Show it off. So he gave up the 2 rakats. That's wara. A person like Abu Bakr Siddiq, if there was any doubt in the food, he would make himself vomit the food. And, you're allowed by Sharia to swallow it, right? But he was wara. That's another level, right? Okay? So this is the person who's supposed to be the wali, right? He also, the Sheikh also avoided bid'ah in Tasawwuf. Now, what is bid'ah in Tasawwuf? Right? He said that the real spirituality is that everyone should follow the example of Prophet Muhammad ﷺ in all that they do. Right? Awareness of Allah by practicing all of the deeds of Islamic lifestyle, whether they be compulsory acts or optional. Awareness of Allah by avoiding all the prohibited acts in order to strengthen themselves through hardship. This is a prohibited innovation by ijma, for the consensus of the scholars, for it is harmful to the person. You know, there are some groups, extreme tasawwuf, where they actually walk on fire. I think in Indonesia, they even stab themselves, right? They have groups that will get into a trance and they'll stab themselves. Okay? So there's different groups. He said that is out. He also said it's bid'ah secluding oneself without having medical reasons. It's prohibited by the ijma of the scholars. In other words, going off on your own and total seclusion with people unless you've got medical reasons. And he said, now this would make him a hardline Salafi here. He said, listening to music for spiritual upliftment with musical instruments that have been prohibited by the majority of scholars. It is a well-known innovation. Okay? That right there is a hardline position, right? So this is a person now that you wouldn't associate the two things together, right? But he actually, has this thing. And he said among the bid'ah, he said denial of miracles of the awliya. Okay, and he denied a number of things. The people said, you fly spiritually. You can do anything. You're the Mahdi. That's what they called him. And he said no. He denied all these things. I mean, I had an experience when I was in Medina. I won't say which country he came from, but an elderly man, beautiful white beard. I lived in the Bedouin section, and he used to see me. He wasn't from Saudi Arabia, though. He knew me and everything, and then one day he came to me and he said, I see you've been here for a couple years with your family. Why don't you go home? I said, I don't have the money. And he said, do you want to go home? And I said, yeah. He said, okay, I will give you a set of dhikrs. You do this thing, and he said, do this 10,000 times, do this 20,000 times. And he said, you will spiritually fly out of your body into Canada without Saudi Airlines or Air Canada. You will do what they call, it's transportation. It's a type of spiritual transporting yourself. Okay? But I had to do these dhikrs like 10,000, 20,000 times in order to lift myself and to do this. Sheikh Uthman Dan Fodio, he rejected this. Okay? So he is a balanced approach to tasawwuf. And what he said was, the only people who he would teach ihsan to is the ones who mastered Islam and Iman. If you do not master your basic studies, you don't even come into class. Because he doesn't want any wild things going on. And he prohibited, the hadra. This is the difference of being soul. The hadra is when people get together and they go, Allah, Gailani, 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 Gailani. And they do it, right? And in some cases they reach a point of like ecstasy. Right? And a friend of mine from the Comoros Islands, he went to one of these hadras, and he said they were in the circle and they're going, and they were doing it and doing it and doing it and doing it and doing it. And then suddenly some of them jumped on the ground, they start barking like dogs. And when they reach that state of ecstasy, if you go to them, they can tell you the future, they can do different things like that. And so they finished all that, and then finally when they were finished, they sat back and they said, okay, bring the biryani now. Let's eat. And that was their Friday night, or their Thursday night. Okay? He prohibited this. And he also said, areas of purification of the heart. And we looked at some of these already. He said, ujub, conceit. Right? You got to purify your hearts of conceit. Pride. Right? We talked about pride, being proud of your color, your language, your nationality, whatever it is. Take pride out of your heart. And he gave practical ways of dealing with this. He said, even dress with rough clothes sometimes. Do humble work. The Prophet ﷺ, when they had the Battle of the Trench, he was lifting stones, digging in the ditch. Right? So, get the pride out of you. Ghadab, anger, losing control of yourself, right? Hasad, we talked about this, envy and jealousy, right? He goes into details about how to stay away from envy and jealousy. His book, Usul ad-Din, The Principles of the Religion, you can get that online. Aisha Bewley, that same sister, she translated this into English. Principles of the Religion by Sheikh Uthman Danfodio. Usul ad-Din. So in this one, he goes into, you see all his details concerning this. Okay? And of course, Riyah, which is showing off in worship. So really what he was doing was, Tasawwuf was a reformation of character to affect social interrelationships and then to reform society. See what he's doing? So you're doing this not to just have a nice dhikr that night and get high. You're reforming yourself in order to improve your relationships with other people and then to reform society. So he was training his people to reform society. This is why he's a special Mujaddid. And he also said that there's a thing called Madakhil Iblis. And this is a text that I have used over the years. Very, very deep. And he said there's ways that the shaitan enters into your heart. And he's very practical with this. What are the ways that the shaitan can enter into your heart? Number one, jealousy and covetousness, right? That's obvious, jealousy. 2, uncontrolled anger and desires. Okay, 3, greed and ambition. These are means of how the shaitan gets into the heart. Because the shaitan wants to destroy our hearts, right? Because if that goes, everything's gone. Excessive love of food and drink. Look at this. Not that you eat, you love to eat. You love to drink things. You have excessive love, the shaitan can come to you. Haste, except in necessary acts of worship. And that's right from a hadith. The Prophet ﷺ said, Al-ajala mina shaitan. Haste is from the devil. That's a hadith. But he said, in necessary acts of worship, like making your prayer on time, going to Hajj if you have the ability, Zad bil Rahila, that's okay. Right? If it's a necessary act of worship. Wealth, if it exceeds the basics. So if you have enough wealth to take care of your family and whatever, okay, that's all right. But when it exceeds, that's the trouble. You got to watch your wealth, make sure you're paying sadaqah, zakat, and you're not tied to your wealth. Fanaticism in madhab and following your whims, your desires. The fanatical madhab people, shaitan actually comes to them. And we have seen this in our community. How our communities have been divided up to the point where a person said, what is that imam? They said he's Shafi'i or whatever. He said, I can't pray behind him. We've seen this in our community. And there was a point even in Mecca and Damascus where they had 4 mihrabs. That was one of the good things that Abdul Aziz did when he took over Mecca. They had 4 mihrabs, 4 places for the imams, 4 imams. So when times comes for Asr prayer, if you're a Hanafi, oh, that's you over there, brother. If you're a Maliki, oh, that's you over there. So 4 salats go on at once because they can't pray behind each other. He said, this is a way the shaitan comes to you, man. Beware. Hatred and contempt for those who disagree with you. This is deep. And look what has happened in our community. Oh, you Salafi. Oh, you Sufi. Oh, you Ikhwani. You this, you that. Where people start hating the person because they disagree. The person might be Muslim just like them. Fasting, praying, halal. But they disagree on certain points, so they hate them. This is a very practical point. He said, burdening the common people with pondering about the essence and descriptions of Allah more than is necessary. In other words, you go to common people and you say, where is Allah? Describe Allah. You start going into Aqidah, high Aqidah, philosophical argument. Don't burden people with this. Don't do that because you will become an oppressor. And the last point, which is very interesting, holding suspicions against Muslims. If you hold a suspicion against Muslims, then the shaitan can come in your heart. And I've seen this over and over again. I will come and say, Assalamu alaikum, brother. Where are you from? That's the first thing they want to know, right? Where are you from? And if you say, I'm this or I'm that, they've judged you 50% or more already, just because you came from this country. Because you suspect people from that country act a certain way. That's called su'a dhan. Right? Suspicion. So these are some of the key points of the Madakhil of Iblis. This is a whole evening itself. It's an evening itself. If you go into each one of these points. Okay? Now, going on further into his life, because we want to give you an overview. The issue of women. He was extremely advanced in the issue of women. And this has become a big thing now in the world. Like the feminist movement is something new. The Me Too movement. And we even have Me Too amongst Muslims. We have this whole thing going on now. And some of it, as I said before, is necessary. Because we do have chauvinism. We still have masjids where women are not allowed to go inside, which is ridiculous. Right? We still have abuse in the families going on. So there are issues of women. This is an advanced person. What did he do? He took a balanced position of public attendance. What he did was, when he would go from place to place, he would establish a study circle after Asr Salat. Okay? In Maghrib, at certain times during the day. And he would make a public gathering, and he would have a section for the men and a section for the women. Now in some cultures, right, that doesn't happen. They force the women to stay home. But you know what he did? And this is one of the things I really respected him for. He came in front of a group of scholars in the community, and he said, your women are ignorant. Because I formed a study circle, I checked it. Your women don't even know how to purify themselves. They don't know how to make salat. You're ignorant women. He said, educate your women. He waited a period of time. They didn't do it. And he said to the women, he called the women and he said, disobey your husbands. Think about this. He said, disobey your husband and come to the halaqah after Asr. And the scholars, they came to him and they said, how dare you say to disobey the husbands? And he quoted the Prophet ﷺ, La ta'a lil makhluq fi ma'siyatil khalaq. You do not obey the creation of Allah when that creation disobeys Allah. So in other words, if the husband refuses to educate the wife, he's in disobedience to Allah, and she does not have to obey him. Now that's a radical move to make, let me tell you. It's a radical move to make. And in some of our communities today, it's necessary. I've gone to so many communities. When you ask the sister, it's Eid day. The Prophet ﷺ said, everybody come to the Eid, even women on their periods, children, everything. I said, where are you going to be on Eid? And they said, in the kitchen making samosas. Because he must have hot samosa when he comes back from Eid. They don't even go to the Eid. Because they think it's haram to do it. And one sister even said, when she goes by the masjid, she gets scared. And she runs. She's scared of the house of Allah. Think about this. Another one came to me and complained. And it was time for Asr. There's a masjid near the marketplace. The brother went to make his Asr. There's no place for women. And she's stuck. And as a woman, it's even more difficult for her to be praying publicly, right? Because the masjid right near that won't allow women to come in. You see? So he took a balanced position. He also encouraged decency in dress. Because in some parts of House of Land, the women were not dressing right. So he encouraged decency in dress and Islamic limits. Okay? He also made compulsory education for women, even in disobedience to their husbands. Compulsory education for women. Okay? Encouragement for women to learn business. This is a good point. And that's important. And what I found is that if a sister can take care of herself, then she has more of a say even in her marriage. And if the marriage breaks down, she's not lost. She can take care of herself. And there's ways that women can work. It doesn't have to be in men's jobs. There's ways, crafts, and there's a lot of things, traditionally how women are involved in, production. Okay. Also, he took a balanced position on the issue of leaving home. So he allowed women to leave home in groups, and whatnot. He took a more balanced position in terms of that. Okay. Now, from amongst the women in his group, there were 48 known scholars, okay, whose names are known. 6 have poetry that survives. Nana Asma'u, Hadija Fatima, Hafsatu, Safiya, Maryam, these are all his daughters. And their cousin Aisha. Especially Nana Asma'u. If you want to read about an African woman scholar, you can get this book online. The author's name is Jean Boyd. Jeanboyd. A courageous European woman. She lived amongst the Fulanis. I don't know how she survived, because they live a tough life. She lived amongst the Fulanis, and she collected the writings of Nana Asma'u. She was an excellent scholar, poetry, treatises in Arabic, for full day, that's their language in Hausa. A well-known person. Then later on, the Amirs would come to Nana Asma'u for advice, just like Aisha radiallahu anha. Okay, that's how strong she was as a scholar. Okay, so that was the position of women. I want to open up the floor for any questions anybody has concerning some of these positions that he's taken so far. Yeah.
Actually, I'm not going to ask the position. I'm just going back to the what kind of, because in our in my perspective, tasawwuf is more like the traditions, the process that not following or more like bid'ah of the
Yeah. Right.
Rasulullah sallallahu alaihi wasallam.
Yeah.
I don't know what kind of his perspective that.
Okay, there's a difference between what people call tasawwuf today.
Yeah.
And what it was in the past.
Oh, okay.
Because, as one scholar said, in the time of the Prophet ﷺ, zuhud, which just means giving up the world, right? Simple life. A zahid is somebody who abstains. He said, zuhud was a reality with no name. So it was a reality, but there's no name to it. Okay? And then the same scholar actually said, now, and he's a Sufi scholar, he said, now it's a name with no reality, right? These people are clowns. They don't have the original zuhud, what it's supposed to be. So in other words, in the time of the Prophet ﷺ, there were different types of people. Khalid ibn Walid is a great warrior. Abdullah ibn Mas'ud is the master of the Quran. Abu Dhar al-Ghifari is a very spiritual, type of person, right? Hated the world. There are different kinds of personalities. When Islam starts spreading, and then people want to learn Islam, then these different areas become specializations. You want to learn Quran? Specialize. You want to learn Hadith? Specialize. Language. Tafsir. So many things. Now, if you want to be a spiritual person, how do you do that? How do you learn to learn ihsan? Okay? Now, when Islam spread, right? But the original ihsan, that is still there. And that's what Imam al-Ghazali was trying to do. Imam al-Ghazali was the master of Islamic sciences. And then he went off to try to find this ihsan. He stayed, traveling around by himself, whatever. And then he came back and he revived the religion. So he was trying to bring the Sufis, if I can use that direct term, into Sharia. He's trying to bring them into Sharia, because some of them are outside. The problem is some teachers will teach you that all of Sufism is all out to lunch. It's all, I mean, sorry, that's American slang. And, all of it is it's extreme and it's bid'ah, right? Like some of the teachers will teach you all Salafis are extremists, and that's wrong. Because a Salafi is only somebody who's trying to follow the Salaf, the first 3 generations. It's sort of a Hanbali way of approaching things. Hanbalis want dalil, they want proof. So it's a Hanbali approach to things, right? That's what a Salafi is. But some people will say Wahhabis. And some people will say Sufis, like it's a shaitan. But the great scholars had the balance, to go bring things in Sharia. And this is where he is unique. Imam Ghazali is unique as well. Because they already have Islamic knowledge. So you can't challenge them Islamically. Right? And then they go into spirituality, but he was sober in this. He did not allow any bid'ah. Anytime he sees a bid'ah, out. Anything he sees that's against the Prophet ﷺ, no. But he was so spiritual in his life that the Sufis put him on the highest level they call qutub. He was the highest level of Sufi. Because he's so spiritual a person, they recognize his excellence in spiritually. But at the same time, if you look at his writings, you think he's a Salafi. How he attacks bid'ah, right? You think he's a Salafi, right? But he's not. So this is what I know it needs a lot of explanation. But when I'm using the word tasawwuf here, it's really ihsan. It is not the drunken Sufism.
Yeah, because the tasawwuf, there is a in my mind, the tasawwuf, there are many stages, and then the top one, they don't need to pray, and they only think
Right.
about.
Exactly. Now this is the one. He's sober. That's what you would call the drunken form.
Yeah.
Because this is the one. There's a theory called wahdatul wujud, which means everything is one life. One. Allah is everywhere. Everything is Allah.
Yeah.
That's called wahdatul wujud. The Hindus had it. Buddhists had it. It's in many different, even they put it in the movie Star Wars. They say the Force. I don't know if you guys watch Star Wars, right? Feel the Force, remember? The good side of the Force. That's the same concept, wahdatul wujud. It's everywhere. So if Luke Skywalker's got to get on the good side, then the whole creation is with him. That's a Buddhist concept. You see? So that came into Islam. And Muslims start thinking like that. And instead of doing the type of thing like Hare Krishna, Hare Rama, the Hindus do dhikr, Krishna, Krishna, Rama, Rama. If you do it, a million times, you're going to go to nirvana. They have dhikr. So instead of doing that, they put Allah, Subhanallah, Alhamdulillah. They use the Islamic things, but they were trying to use the drunken part, and they went to the point where, like you say, they say, why do I have to pray? My heart beats Allah. One of the famous ones, I hate to put names on people. One of the famous ones said, Allah fi jaybi. Allah's in my pocket. Because if Allah's everywhere, then He's in your pocket too, right? So they started saying crazy things, right? Which took them outside of Islam. That's what he was against. He is a sober form of tasawwuf, a balanced form of tasawwuf. You see? That's the difference. It's hard today because people tend to be on extremes. But you'll see in some universities like Azhar University, you see some of the great scholars of Islam, big scholars, Ibn Kathir and Suyuti, a lot of big scholars. They had a Sufi tariqah because it only meant your spirituality. That's all it meant. It did not mean that you're part of these wild dhikrs and things like that. No, that's the drunken form. Okay, so this is the sober form of tasawwuf. Okay, so now another question.
That time in West Africa, were there other so prevalent in that area?
Yes, there were some Shafis. Yeah, there were no Hanbalis and Hanafis, but there was some Shafi. And so Sheikh Uthman, in his writings, he even said you can follow the rulings of Imam Shafi also, no problem. You have a madhab, but if you see Shafi is bringing you some things that are correct, follow it. So he was against fanaticism, in the school of thought. Now, this area of struggle is another deep one. And again, this, is a long discussion involved in this. But, he looked at jihad, not just holy war, but he said it was a struggle, was a process that began internally and eventually entered society. Right? It's like a struggle against evil. Also, he believed strongly in calling to the good and forbidding evil, and he believed that people should pledge allegiance to a leader. You should have a bay'ah. You should have a leader. And he said hijrah is necessary and defense against attack. So in other words, if you're under attack, you can migrate. And it may be necessary to migrate. Okay? He also said fighting is an alternative. It's not the objective. See what he said? That's not the objective, but it is an alternative. Today they would call him an Islamist, jihadist, whatever. But he's saying that's not his objective, right? But we have the right, even under the United Nations, to defend yourself, right? That's a God-given right, even before the United Nations. He also stressed the importance of al-amru bil ma'ruf, calling to the good and forbidding evil, the critical nature of hijrah, of migration. There's a whole book, Wujub al-Hijrah al-Ibad, one of his great books. It's on hijrah. Beautiful book on hijrah that he did. Importance of mu'alat, that is allegiance, clientage, who's your wali, how you deal with each other. It's mu'alat. It's a very important concept. Okay? So, in conclusion, some of the key lessons from the life of the Shehu. He said, number one, the importance of solid Islamic education. Okay? Also, the importance of balance in the application of Islamic knowledge. Balance. 3, the necessity of women being educated and involved in the Islamic movement. The inclusion of tasawwuf in Sharia. Right? You got to bring it into Sharia. Flexibility in the school of thought. And he said the importance of internal development, the development of the heart. These are some of the key lessons of Shaykh Uthman ibn Fudi, rahimahullah. A great scholar, a great mujaddid, whose influences are still having an influence on people up until today. And I was surprised to find out that amongst the slaves and political prisoners who were captured and came to America, that you can actually see his teachings amongst the slaves. So that's what we're studying now. Because some of the slaves came from Nigeria, areas where his teachings were still there, and it came out in their writing, Arabic writings that we're finding here. Amazing stuff, man. He wrote a book called Wathiqa ibn Fudi ila Ahl Sudan. This is the treatise of Ibn Fudi to the people of the Sudan. Sudan meaning the people of the dark-skinned people, not just Sudan, the whole area. This was his call to jihad. And they found a document in Jamaica, and it was called Wathiqa, by African slaves who could speak Arabic and were writing to each other from Kingston, the capital, into the countryside. And this Wathiqa made it to the Manchester section of Jamaica, and I think it was around 1835 there was a great rebellion in that area. And that Wathiqa, we believe, is the Wathiqa of Ibn Fudi ila Ahl Sudan. So it reached all the way over here. Very significant person and a great reviver of the religion. And one of the beautiful things, again, about him, which really is, I think, is important, he never claimed to be this. And he would refuse people if they tried to say that he was. He wouldn't let them do it. Right? He remained humble all of his life. When power was in front of him, he gave it to other people. So my thing is teaching. reviving the deen. That's a mujaddid, right? Not sulta, not authority. It's reviving Islam in the hearts and minds of the people. That is a true mujaddid. And where he distinguishes himself is that he not only revived in word, but he revived it in deed. And his people controlled 250,000 square miles for over 100 years to the coming of the British. They controlled it. And Nigeria today, it is majority Muslim country. And most of the Muslims live in the north. And this is the land of Sheikh Osman bin Fodio. Even the President Buhari, of Nigeria, if you see the heads of state, he's Muslim, right? You'll see that their main heads of state in their thing have also always been, not always, but their main ones have been Muslim. Because the Hausa and Fulanis are still the most powerful, people, there in Nigeria, which is the second most populated Muslim country on the African continent. Right, so very significant. Very significant. Any final questions that anybody has?
Just, can you just expand on the necessity of the women involvement in Islamic movement?
Yeah, like what he's saying is that, everybody should be involved in learning Islam, teaching Islam in their own way. He never tried to have women do what men do. But when it comes to struggle, they're involved in the struggle. And you will see that even in the time of the Prophet ﷺ, there were women who went out to the jihad. Nusayba, the famous woman who shielded the Prophet ﷺ with her body. So the sunnah is that women would be there. They would generally be the secondary, troops who are taking care of medicine and whatever. But they could fight, like Nusayba could fight, right? So they were actually involved. So that's the position he took also. That women, they would not be necessarily a front line or to be totally doing what men do. But in their own way, they should be involved. Because movement is more than just like a political thing. It's social thing, it's economic thing. It's the raising of an Islamic society.
This is what happens. Every group, they think, like Tabligh Jamaat, they have their women's group, like gatherings separate from them.
Right.
And Ahl Sunnah has again separate their own brand of, So this is what I'm trying to see. Is there any broader explanation that he gave? Because every group is thinking their own women.
Yeah.
They are doing something in the Islamic movement in their own group.
Yeah, each group has got to make their decisions. But his thing is based on sunnah. If you go back to the sunnah, women were involved in the community right from the beginning all the way through, even the Medina period. And Aisha was a judge. So they were involved. Okay, now I'm not talking about dress, I'm not talking about hanging out with men, but they're involved in the way that they should. Is when men are saying, women stay home and cook, nothing. I went to one Muslim country, I won't say which one it is, and we're driving along and they said, this is madrasa for our boys, Quran schools. I said, mashallah. I said, where's the girls? They said, no, Abdullah. If you educate them, you're in trouble. I said, okay, what sunnah is this, man? What sunnah is this?
The thing is corruption.
Yeah. You think if a woman learns something, she's going to be a danger to you because she has knowledge? That's ignorance, man.
Their power goes away, right? Their knowledge is limited. So.
And you know what I found out in a practical sense? The Islamic movements that keep women out, the men eventually fight each other because they're intolerant. A woman adds something to the leadership because the women they think of the family, the community. They have a different, if you get their opinion in there, you're going to get a different discussion. If it's just men, it's power and authority and my ego, and I'm the leader and you're not the leader. They're killing each other and fighting. Woman's different, man. She got the children there and the family. Why? So I found this out in a practical way. I watched them. The ones who were intolerant in their women eventually became intolerant on each other. And they ended up killing each other, or driving each other out, or forming another movement, because they don't have the tolerance, right? So his thing was sunnah from the beginning. And Allah blessed him in his life to follow the sunnah. He even died at the same age of the Prophet Muhammad ﷺ, is when he died. Everything's sunnah.
What is the number two saying? Balance in the application of Islamic norms.
This is not to go to extremes. So he's saying that like a balanced person, looks for, if there's another school of thought, they'll take from another school of thought. Right? You don't go into extremes. The problem many scholars fall into is that they go to extremes. And they think it's my way or the highway. No, he's a more balanced type of scholar. Listen to other opinions, be flexible. This is what we need today, right? It's one of the things holding back the scholars. Why are we still fighting over the Hilal? This is ridiculous, man. This is a shame. Why?
This is why they need some different interpretation. Like there are some of the people, in winter especially, they are working and they don't have time to go every an hour and a half or 2 hours to go and pray. Dhuhr, Asr, Maghrib. They're working 12-hour shifts.
Right.
So somebody was asking, at the time of Dhuhr, can I make jump? Because I cannot get out again for Asr.
Right.
Because they're on production line or in a, so, well, there are, options given there.
Yeah.
So, good. They follow.
There are options. I mean, they say that there's a hadith in Sahih Muslim, which they say is the least used hadith, but it is one where one of the companions, he, was with a, and you're at home, and you're not at war, and it's not raining out or it'll be snowing out for us. But it shouldn't be a habit. The problem is when it becomes a habit. This is where it's wrong.
Well, if the person is,
But it can happen. It can happen to all of us.
if they can't get away from work, and that.
If you can't get away,
Days, they have to do it.
there is, right, but the
Rather
person,
than missing Asr,
right,
not praying Asr at all, they can make jump.
right. But the only thing is the scholars say, don't make it a habit. Because the Shias made it a habit, right? So many of the Shias, they only make Dhuhr and Asr all the time together, right? No, we don't, it should be made. But, there are occasions where it happens. And if it happens, then you can combine. But that's the least used hadith, they say. But it's there, right? It's in Sahih Muslim. There is a hadith like that. It's authentic. So a balanced scholar, if you're balanced, you can live a stressless, without stress in your life, man. Know the flexibility of the sunnah, right? Allah is merciful. You intend to do what's right, then, try your best. This is his approach. So inshallah, alhamdulillah, we pray that Allah subhanahu wa ta'ala would enable us to, revive Islam in our life and would revive Islam in this ummah. We pray that Allah would raise up a mujaddid in these times. We are in serious need of a mujaddid right now in these times to take us from darkness into light. Subhanallah wa bihamdihi, subhanakallahumma wa bihamdika, nashhadu an la ilaha illa anta nastaghfiruka wa natubu ilayk. Bismillahir Rahmanir Rahim wal 'asr. Innal insana lafi khusr illa alladhina amanu wa 'amilus salihat wa tawasaw bil haqq wa tawasaw bis sabr. Wa sallallahu ta'ala ala sayyidina Muhammad wa alihi wa sahbihi wa barak wa sallam. Wassalamu alaikum wa rahmatullahi wa barakatuh.